Hi everyone, this is the next CJP challenge that you've all requested, 3D nail art. You will need the one monomer. You can use any if you haven't got the one, but I'll explain later why I use the one. A 3D nail brush, I use Precise, snow white powder and a black display tip. I just use black gel polish and matte top coat. We're going to go straight in. So I'm wiping my brush on the side of my dappen dish 3 times. I've picked up roughly about 3 times, just little dabs into the top of the acrylic. So I've slowed this right down so you can see what I'm doing with my brush. When you're doing 3D, it's all about the shape of your brush. So with the feather of the brush, it's flat, it's pinched on the end. So what I'm doing, I'm shaping the bristles of my brush to the same shape as the ferrule. So it's flat. By doing that, it'll help so much when it comes to shaping the petals, because you want it, you put in a flat surface against another flat surface. If we left it round, it would just leave dents in the acrylic and would not push out to where we want. 3D is all about patience. So here, my bead's not quite ready, it's too wet. So I just, as you can see, spend time flattening my brush back out, testing that acrylic, see if it's ready. And what I'm doing here, I'm pushing up against the acrylic, see if it bounces back. Now it's not bouncing back now, so it's starting to get into that mouldable stage. So with the flat of the brush, I'm putting the point of my brush at where I want the centre of my petal to be. Trying to show you different angles so you can see the angle of my brush. So I'm putting all my pressure at the middle of that petal to the point, and then I'm pressing down on the acrylic and trying to push it out to form that petal. Then I'm using the side of my brush to pull it back in. Not the flat of the brush, the side where it's thinner. If you use the flat of the brush, it will just push over the acrylic, which then you'll have to try and flatten back out. So what I do when I come to placing my petals, I use a clock as a reference. So I tend to, for this type of flower, because there's 3, and I always do my flowers, particularly where there's individual petals like this, in odd numbers. I just think aesthetically it looks nicer. There's no symmetry to it, which makes it look, it flows better, it's more natural looking, nothing in nature is symmetrical. So I place one at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Again, it depends where I'm placing it on the nail, that might change, but that's the type of angle, so you can try and understand where I'm placing them. You can see with this petal, I've pressed really down on it to really spread it out, and it's almost see-through in the centre, which again I think adds depth, it gives it shadow. And I've tried to push that petal up over my first petal just so that it adds a bit more dimension to it. So the reason I've suggested using the one monomer is for a few reasons. I know a lot would panic doing this with the one because it's the fastest setting one, but I've always found when I'm teaching that patience is the biggest problem. People are trying to get straight in there and press at the acrylic, and it's too wet and you don't get that definition of the petals, and it can get quite messy. So by using the one, if you're not as patient of a person and you're panicking of knowing when to press, I think the one's better because it's going to get you to that mouldable stage quicker. I've done this in my cabin and I've had the heat on, and I think it was a heat of 30 degrees. It weren't obviously up to 30 degrees, but that's what I set it at because I'm really nesh. And you can see how much time I've had to play with this and mould it. So what I'm doing now, I've got a smaller bead of acrylic and I placed it in the centre. You don't have to place acrylic in centre, you could use caviar beads or a diamond, which I do prefer, but because I was just doing acrylics and I didn't have all that out, I thought I'd show you how to do a centre with acrylic. So what I'm doing, I'm just testing that bead, see if it's ready to be pushed into, and I just keep nudging it. What I also do in between is keep wiping my brush on the paper towel, which means it's taking excess monomer out of my brush, so I'm not adding monomer to the bead, which again will cause problems. So I've just gone in with the tip of my brush, wiggled it about a bit from side to side, up and down, just to open that centre up, which gives you that finished flower. So we're going to go in with the second flower. I have done 3 on this nail. I'm not quite sure if there's enough to explain on all 3, but on this one I did try and get closer to the flower face so you can see, and so I can explain mouldable stages. So I've just placed that one. Again, aesthetically, I'm placing in between those two petals on the above one, and I'm going to be pressing it up into that gap. So as you can see, I've gone closer here, and where I'm pointing with my brush, I don't know if you can see, there's like a white shadow around that bead where it's spread out slightly. That is too wet to be pressing into, so as you can see, I'm just using the side of my brush to nudge it back in. And to test the petal, I will press onto the bead and see if it'll bounce back. That didn't bounce back, so it was ready to be pressed. So again, I'm just moulding it and pushing it into shape. Again, when you push down on a petal, as you press down, try and pull the product away from the centre of the flower. That helps spread it out. And also I always try and obviously make the centre point of the petal at the top on the outer edge higher than either side. With this bead, as you can see, it's slightly a bit dry. You can see that the indentation of my brush, so before wiping my brush, I'm just tapping onto that bead so that the brush will disperse the monomer back onto it. This is like you're manipulating the bead. So instead of wasting that bit of acrylic, I've just added a bit more monomer with my brush. As you can see, I'm just waiting for it to be mouldable stage, and it is. So I'm pressing in, keeping the point of my brush to the centre of that petal, and it to the centre of where the flower will be. I'm just nudging the acrylic into place. Again, I'm going in with a third bead. That one again was slightly dry, so I just tapped it there and then wiped the excess monomer out of my brush. I also used the point of my brush while it's at that wet stage to pull it into the rough shape that we want, so there's less work involved. So again, from side to side, just checking whether to see if that's mouldable, and then when it is, just repeat the process. You can see there where I tapped into it and the acrylic bounced back slightly. So I just waited a few seconds and tried it again, and it was mouldable. As you can see, I took the liquid out the back of my brush on the paper towel because I felt it was a bit too wet. You don't want to really get into that habit of doing it because you're going to waste monomer. Here on this one, I think I show you about it bouncing back, so I've just pressed into it and you can see that it's still a bead shape, it's round, it's springing back, it's not leaving a hole within that acrylic. So I've done that just so that you can see what I mean by just having that patience and waiting. And that was literally just a couple of seconds, and it's ready, it's mouldable. And again, I'm just pushing in with the tip of my brush and nudging it, outwards. Again, we're going to do the same thing where we want the next petal to go in between the last two that we finished the second flower off with. So I have turned my brush the other way around because I'm trying to nudge it up into that gap. But then I'm also using the point of my brush to make sure there's a gap left between those petals, so there's a bit of definition. So it just don't look like one big white blob. I've gone in here with World's Smallest Bead. It was pointless. But again, this is another thing, don't be scared to just wipe it off and try again. This again is this one's really wet, and I purposely left this one on so that I could show you what it looks like when it's really, really wet. So you can see that it has that milky look to it, and it just disperses itself across the nail. So I've gone out of shot a bit there. So I just kept pushing it back just so that it didn't run everywhere and run into my other petal. And it's just as simple as that. It's just having that patience to wait for that petal to be ready. If you press into it too soon, you are not going to get those crisp edges. And the only way I can describe it, it's like blurry around the edges. It's not sharp if you do it too soon. On this one as well, that bead's probably a bit too big. But again, I'm not quite sure if you catch it, but I just nudge it back up onto the nail. Again, it creates a little lip, makes it more natural looking. So this is your final centre. Again, testing the acrylic, see if it's ready to be moulded. And that will be the last of the flowers for this one. I'm going to be moving on to the rose next, which is a bit more complicated. It can get confusing after the first round of petals, but hopefully I can talk you through it. But again, if you don't want to do centres like this, you could use a different coloured acrylic and do the centres similar to this. You could just do a bead of acrylic and just keep pushing it and nudging it back into place so it holds its shape. Or you can add caviar beads or a crystal. So we're going to go in with the rose now. You want bigger beads for these because we're spreading it out over a wider area. The shape of your brush is really important with this, so you need to make sure it's flat. The way I describe it is we will be using it like a knife. We're going to cut into that acrylic so you can see that that's flat, and then when you turn it to the side, it's really, really thin. So turn your brush to the side and then you're going to cut the acrylic in the centre of that bead and spread it out from one side to the other. Best way I can describe it is like window wipers. From side to side, pushing it out, creating that crescent, and then with the belly of your brush, with your brush on an angle, press into that acrylic, and whilst you're pressing, push up away from the centre, which gives you that wider petal. Again, with these, we are aiming for the middle outer section of the petal to be higher up than the sides. You can see that I'm constantly trying to keep the point of my brush to the centre of the petal and just tapping outwards. Going in with the second bead now. When I do the same thing, you press into it, cut it and push from side to side, but what we want to do is we want this second petal to overlap the first. So can you see how I'm nudging it towards the first petal? I'm also pushing the acrylic back because I place it too far to the centre, so I'm just pushing it back, doing the side to side motion, getting it into place. Whilst doing this, you are feeding the bead with more monomer, so it will help keep it at that mouldable stage. So again, I'm pressing into that acrylic, working from side to side. Can you see how far that petal's just pulled down? It's amazing how mouldable this is. You can literally keep going until you stop playing with it. That's when it starts to go into its setting stage. When I place my petals, when my beads, I do the clock reference in my head again. So it's normally about 11 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 3, 4 o'clock. So again, with this third petal, I want both sides of this petal to overlap the first and the second petal. This is obviously where it starts to get a bit confusing trying to remember each stages, but I find by just going round in a spiral inwards, it's easy to keep track of where you started. So I'm just tapping this bead of acrylic, creating that petal over the first and the second one. Here I'm just going under my second petal to show you that it's still not fully set, so you can lift pieces of acrylic up to give it more of a 3D feel. I'm doing the same there, and then I'll show you on the first petal how it's completely set. You can't move that, so if you're going to do that, you need to try and remember and keep track. Now we're going to go on to the fourth petal. This is where, from experience in teaching, people start to lose track a little bit. So this one you place in between your second and your third petal, and you're going in the centre of those two petals and pushing that acrylic side to side over those petals. I thought that bead was too small because we want to stretch it quite far, so we want that to cover from that top section overlapping the third bead and coming down the bottom. So I've got a much larger bead this time. Another reason is you need it larger because you need that acrylic to be able to mould up and go over the previous two petals, and because they're set, they're now hard. So if it's not thick enough, it can, the best way to describe it, break the acrylic, and you then can still see the lower petals. So that's quite a thick piece of acrylic there. Now I'm just going in and pushing over those two side petals, and then the centre I'm trying to pull right over the first petal that we placed. By waiting for this mouldable stage and by having a bit more product there, it helps keep it all looking crisp and gives it that sharp definition that's needed. Again, from past experience, when a lot of people go in way too soon and it just ends up really messy. There's no definitions to the petals. This type of art, it does take practice and patience, but once you've cracked it, it's like riding a bike. So now with this fifth petal, even I've lost count now, we're going to connect it to the fourth petal. So you can see how I'm brushing that acrylic up to the edge of the first. Can you see how it connects? And so this is how it gives it that spiral look, how it's all one and comes around together. So I'm just tapping that down again over the lower petals, pushing it and spreading it out, and then I've left the corner of that last petal a bit thicker again, so it stands out and it gives us something else to connect to for the next bead. So we're going in with our final bead now, and launched my brush. So again, going in while it's wet with the corner tip of my brush, we're going to do the same that we did on the last petal. We're going to try and connect this one to the last one. So I'm just using the point of my brush, again nudging it into place while waiting for it to get to that mouldable stage. So now for the centre, you can see I'm holding my brush upright and I'm doing almost like I'm drawing a circle. So with this, I am constantly pushing and pulling at the acrylic to stretch that acrylic so that I can pull it round. This bit of acrylic's probably gone past a bit more than the mouldable stage that I like to work at, because you can see here I'm really pulling out the product and stretching it. If I was doing it on a client, I'm much faster and I would have done it by now. But it's great to see how much you can move this product and how long you have to work with it. I have stretched that acrylic so far to create that final swirl, and that's the rose finished. So I'm just going to show you now what it looks like from different angles so you can see how flat it is. If that is flat enough that you could encapsulate that. If you don't want it that flat, just use bigger beads and don't press them down on the acrylic and spread it out as much. It wasn't asked for, but I thought I'd throw it in there anyway. I'm going to show you how to do leaves. I think people think they're a lot more complicated than they are. So you go in with a large bead, and while it's wet, you just want to push it into position. I want this one to look like it's growing out from underneath the rose. So I'm just going to use the tip of my brush, pull it and nudge it to my rose. Just tidying it up, testing it, see if it's mouldable. So now it's at that mouldable stage. I'm going to press down the acrylic. What I do with this, I press either side. So I want it to be fatter nearer the rose and then obviously coming down to a point. So on this section, I'm just tapping away at the middle and pulling at the point of the leaf. See how I push that up from one side and then down from the other? It's now created a groove almost in the, like a fold in the leaf. So for the next stage, it needs to be at the mouldable stage. If it's past the mouldable stage, it's just not going to happen. I usually use just the edge of a a cuticle pusher. Mine's got a knife on the end. I usually use that, but I couldn't find that, didn't have it to hand, so I'm just using a craft knife and I'm just pressing into that acrylic, creating that vein down the centre of the leaf, and then I'm just going to press in on an angle, coming away from the centre to the edge. Sorry, I've gone out of shot there a little bit, but I'm just repeating the same thing on the other side. I'm now going to go in with another one just to balance it out a little bit. Again, while it's wet, pushing it up under the rose next to the other leaf so it looks like it's coming from both under that leaf and the rose. And I just repeat the process exactly the same way I did the last one. I think I actually show you what to do if you have too much product. This leaf, I had too much acrylic, so you can see here that I literally just used the side of my brush and chop that off, and then I just remold the end into a point. And like before, I wait for that moldable stage and then I'll go in with the blade and put my veins in. Another thing you could do also with the centre is again add a crystal or some caviar beads to finish it off. I'm just going in and tidying up some residue that can sometimes be left over. Because it's on a matte nail, it's more obvious to see. So I'm just going in there and wiping it off. You can do this on a top shine top coat. I just think that with a matte top coat, when you're practicing, it's just a bit easier because it gives you a bit more grip with the product. Whatever you do, never top coat 3D. It just loses all its definition. It doesn't stay crisp at all. I never ever top coat my 3D work. So that's the end of the 3D flower challenge. Give it a go. If you struggle, give me a shout. I'm more than happy to help, and make sure you tag me in the work that you do. I love to see it. Thanks. Bye.